I might live in Oakland, but y'all know I'm moving around in these streets, and I need hairstyles that allow me to pull up cute and ready to explore all a city has to offer. Braids and Weaves by Dee Dee's selection of low-tension protective styles allow me to do exactly that, whether it's braids, twists, or faux locks, and their color-blending options let me customize my look from blonde to brunette and everything in between. But they're more than just protective styling. They offer natural styles and prioritize educating clients about the unique needs and health of their hair to keep it flourishing in between appointments or looks. So whether you're looking for traditional salon services, a head-turning protective style, or even takedown services, check out Braids and Weaves by Dee Dee on Instagram and enjoy an experience with Dee Dee and her talented team of stylists. Hit the link in their bio to book an appointment today. I'm Kahja Elliott, and I'm a food enthusiast. Bronx born and raised, ATL made, Bay Area becoming. And I talk to people about how they create community through food in the Bay and beyond. Welcome to the As Told By podcast. All right, welcome to this week's episode of the As Told By podcast. I am back on location today in beautiful Playa Vista, California, Los Angeles County, because I'm talking with Mona Holmes, editor at Eater LA, regular contributor at KCRW Radio, and 2022 James Beard Award nominee. As a multimedia reporter, she covers restaurants, bars, and hospitality in Los Angeles, writing about California's restaurant industry regulations and laws, gentrification, Black and Latino neighborhoods, the cannabis food industry, street food vendors, changing trends, and the deep history throughout the Southland. So, Mona, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Kahja. Thank you.
I appreciate you coming.
Of course.
And it's nice. This is our first time meeting, but I've been following you on social media for a little bit. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so thanks for being here.
Oh, anytime.
Yeah.
Anytime you want to talk about food and restaurants, I'm here.
Okay, good. Look, you are the second person from the Eater franchise to be on the podcast. So shout out to my homie, Diane de Guzman of San Francisco. Mm-hmm. Y'all are good people over there.
She's a pretty wonderful writer, a powerhouse, actually.
Yes.
Like, I don't know how she does all the stuff she does.
Yeah, she's dope. She's dope. So I'm meeting you for the first time. Are you an LA native?
I am originally, I was born in Mount Vernon, New York.
Hey.
Yeah, well, my parents got tired of cold weather. Apparently, like the year I was born, they said that there was some massive snowstorm that had them say people don't need to live like this. And so my dad had an uncle who lived in San Diego and was begging him to come out. Mm-hmm. And then we became Californians. And so even though I'm from there, like I don't have any memory of it. I grew up in Altadena.
Okay.
And I am a Californian, like at my soul.
Got it. Okay. From money earning, people who know the topography know you can stand on one side of the street and be in Mount Vernon and stand on the other side and be in the Bronx. So I'm very familiar. Yeah. Yes. So you mentioned your family. What kind of, I actually think I'm going to make this like a signature question on the podcast because I enjoy people's answers to this. But what kind of food family do you come from?
Okay. So a very traditionally black, like as black can be. My mother, she's given up cooking, like she says her duty is done. Mm-hmm. But she was the mom who cooked us something homemade every single night. I do not know how she did it. And she was a very inventive cook, but a lot of it leaned very traditional. So, mm-hmm. and so soulful, very, she is an excellent, like at making fried chicken, smothered pork chops, mm-hmm. everything had a ton of flavor, but strangely, you know what my favorite dish of hers from childhood was liver and onions in gravy.
I love a woman after my own heart because that's a meal.
It's a full-on meal and apparently quite good for you. But what's interesting is that when someone was recently asking me for my favorite childhood recipe, they cringed when I said liver and onions. And I said, you have to know what to do with it. Mm-hmm. My mother makes an excellent gravy, a recipe that she passed down to all of us. And, as you know, it is all about the technique and seasoning.
Yes.
And so she was able to do that with many things. So and then the holidays were just something else. But she was an excellent cook. And then my oldest sister, I'm the youngest of four.
Okay.
They learned how to cook before I did. I had no interest because everyone was doing it for me forever. So why should I? Until I left the house. and
Yes.
Luckily it passed down now. But yeah, we had a very great menu growing up, thanks to my mother.
Okay, so people were throwing down in the kitchen.
Were they ever?
Okay. So look, so you are coming into this kind of career with, a lot of personal experience just in the culture of food and the language of food. And I know that you came on board with Eater LA in 2017.
Correct.
What were you doing before that?
I've been in media for a long time. I started, probably my first job was at KPCC Radio, a public radio station here in Pasadena. I quite literally walked in there in 96, if I'm not mistaken, 95, giving up my age. And just, I literally asked for a job. I didn't know what I wanted to do in media. I just knew that I wanted to be around it, and they hired me. Based on just like, I'm like, I'd love to work here. They said, sure, here. And they were wonderful. But, that moved on to another job at NPR headquarters in Washington, D.C. And then when I came back, I had already started a digital publication about female DJs and vocalists and producers called SheJ. It was a really fun project.
That's a fun name.
It killed me physically.
Wow.
Because it was just, I had a full-time job at the time.
Okay.
But this was like my side gig. So I would come home and work for hours, but when you can do such things in your 20s. And, from there it moved on to, different forms of media until I started writing about restaurants. But when I moved back to California, after living in DC for 4 years, I kept the magazine going, but, it required, additional work. So I waited tables, something that I've done most of my adult life to supplement my income.
Okay.
And so restaurants were always something that a job that I always felt comfortable in. Once you've worked in one restaurant, you can kind of figure it out. And I loved being around that culture. So when it came to writing about it, I felt like I had a perspective that could bring the front of the house, because that's a whole other industry. And I'm appreciative for it. I think that everyone in the world should wait tables at least for like 6 months, because I think we'd be better humans.
Yeah, definitely make you a better restaurant patron.
My goodness. The things that I see where I'm like, whoa, hey, that's kind of crazy. But then, I have a lot of contacts in Los Angeles, people that I'm either friendly with or friends. And that turned into a career.
Okay. All right. Look, that working in a restaurant will definitely prime you for food writing.
Oof.
Yes.
Yes, it will.
You got the behind the scenes.
I do.
I always say, to have been living in the Bay now for just about 11 years, I am shocked at the small amount of time I have spent in LA. I have got to get out here more often, because I don't really know much about the food landscape here beyond what I know through like pop culture. So when I think about food and I think about LA, I think about the amazing job. Well, first of all, I think about taco culture, right?
Yes.
I will spare you the question that I ask people sometimes of, are tacos better in NorCal or SoCal? Because
you can ask me that question.
I already know what you're going to say.
I actually have, I think you might want to hear my answer.
Okay, let me hear it.
Okay, so I respect Bay Area, LA, and San Diego taco culture separately. I have a strong appreciation for it. I went to university in San Francisco at SF State.
Okay.
So I spent a good amount of time really digging in and understanding what taco culture or Mexican food culture is like in the Bay. I spent the majority of my time in Los Angeles, of course. And I'm lucky enough to have a cousin. My cousin is married to someone who was born and raised in San Diego.
Okay.
So yeah, I do believe that the most interesting Mexican food in California is in San Diego.
Really?
I do. I
Okay.
think that there's something that's just a little bit more vibrant. It's also a little bit smaller, so it's easier to digest, literally.
Okay.
And, I just find, especially with Barrio Logan being like such an epicenter of culture and being adjacent to Tijuana.
Yes.
So I feel like it's such a perfect way for anyone to experience Mexican food, and very distinct. You know, like you get a burrito from San Diego and it is very different from here or the Bay.
Okay.
And, you know, like they love their burritos and their tacos like very differently than we do. They have their rolled tacos, not like flautas, but like rolled tacos. And then you come up to LA and I mean, we have tacos on every corner, quite, you know,
Yes.
I mean, I think everyone would say like, yeah, that's absolutely the case. Everyone has their favorite taquero for sure. And so we win by sheer volume. And then there's the Bay where, you know, your Mission Street style burrito and taco are very unique.
Yes.
And work in some ways. I'm not a big fan of that style of burrito, but I've had it many a late night enough where I can appreciate every single bite. But I appreciate them for their distinctness and what they are.
Okay.
And you know, how they complement each city and how basically California is Mexico. Like, if we're being real.
Yes. I mean, listen, that was an unexpected answer, y'all. I thought she was going to ride hard for LA. But, you know, I have to say, as a native East Coaster, I have been spoiled now by Mexican food and all foods of the Asian diaspora. I just don't even want to eat them when I go other places unless I'm in the native country. And I'm just like, I ain't eating no tacos in New York. I don't care who's behind it. I don't want it.
They've actually gotten better in recent years.
Okay.
Like you know, being a New Yorker, you know, when my cousins came out to visit to LA, I just assumed that everyone ate like we did, that everyone ate tacos. And when they didn't know, I'm like, I felt sorry for them. I'm like, what's wrong with y'all? Like they're like, don't y'all have any Spanish food? And I'm like, what?
Oh, they wanted cuchifritos.
They wanted that. I know they wanted arroz con condules. I know what they wanted, but like, you know, there was it's amazing to think about how Mexican food has expanded in my lifetime, you know, because now apparently something like 45% of restaurants in the United States are Mexican.
I didn't know that,
they are
statistic.
Yes, they're becoming as common as pizza and Chinese food. And that, I think, is a beautiful thing.
Yes. Well, thank goodness for that, because, you know, I've had my share and done my part. So I definitely, when I think of LA, I think of tacos, but then I think about things, like I was saying, in the pop culture lexicon that have really kind of showcased either directly or indirectly food in LA. So I think about Insecure and the role that kind of food and restaurants played as like a background character in a lot of the stories. You know, so when I think of food here, my mind almost defaults immediately to Black and brown people, which is a lot of your focus. So what do you think is the through line of a lot of those food stories of that culture for you, if there is one?
You've probably seen a lot of my coverage of Insecure on Eater. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Like, it's the through line is that as the largest county in the country by a lot, 1 in 6 people in the country lives in LA County. And what do people come here for? They come here for more opportunity, for jobs, to, you know, they're fleeing something. You know, I mean, that's the case with all over the world, but they generally come to city centers. And so with every Black and brown group and Asian, you know, they've completely, you know, surrounded around and, you know, established LA as their own. LA has a lot of the largest out of populations. We have the largest Korean population outside of South Korea. We have the largest Mexican population outside of Mexico. We have the largest Filipino population outside of...
more than the Bay?
Girl.
Wow.
So many. I live in Eagle Rock. It is Filipino Central. Okay. And it's great because like I can get lumpia at any time.
It's all over the place.
Ugh, it's so delicious.
Yes.
And, you know, you keep going with that. The San Fernando Valley, the next time you come back, I will happily take you to get some of the best Chinese food in the country. Yes. You know, and not just Chinese, like very specific, Taiwanese, Shanghai, xiaolongbang. Like, you name like 6 different types of cuisine that is in and around China, we have it. And very different from New York. And it's no diss to New York, just different.
It's just different, yeah.
And, you know, and then with Black folks, you know, we're one of many centers in the U.S. where during the first and second Great Migrations, Black folks were escaping the South and wanted to live in places where they could get better jobs and better housing and a better future for their families. And so, and then you bring along, the areas that they were relegated to, and, and you have great culture. And, with Koreatown and Crenshaw and Leimert Park and South LA and the San Gabriel Valley, where you can get these great things, or even in my neighborhood where I live, where the Filipino is off the chain. And so, it's pretty incredible when someone comes up to me and says, I can't find really good food when I come to LA, which happens more than you think. And I don't even try and convince them anymore. I just say, you know what, you need to ask people and do your due diligence, because, we have more restaurants here than anywhere else in the United States. So you're not looking hard enough.
No, surely there's good food here. I don't believe that.
Believe it.
Yes. So clearly you just gave us like a rundown. So you have, an informed perspective. So when you think about your career, how do you impart your personal voice as a writer when you're writing for an entity or a publication and you aren't necessarily writing from your first person experience?
Good question. That's taken a long time to sort out. There's a constant push and pull in any media outlet where you have to set aside your own biases and your own leanings to make sure that you can just report the story. And the older I get, I realize how impossible that is. And you can try very hard. I wrote a story today, and I have to be very careful that I don't name the restaurant, that is... the chef and owner is from a part of the world that is embroiled in a conflict. And a lot of people are against this side in the world. And, and I was talking to one of my mentors about, how do we handle, he's another Black food writer. How do we handle stories like that? And he was amazing. He said, it's not our job to assess who is right or wrong here. This person might be on the side that is against this place or this conflict.
Got it. You can't assume.
And you can't assume. And does it provide your readers with the information that they need to go there and make an educated decision? Because that's my job. It's not my job to say whether the food is good or bad. It's my job to be like, here's the information. You decide on whether or not you want to go. And for my current employer, it's not my job to pick sides in a conflict. And but I think I put enough clues in there for people who it does mean something to make that decision for themselves.
Got it.
And because it's important to me that people go where they're wanted and where they feel safe. So it's very tricky. And also on social media, it allows me for that ability to talk in first person. Like, our mayor, Karen Bass, wound up tweeting and putting on threads, something about LA is the best place to open up a restaurant in the country. And I'm like, just a moment, just a minute.
Hold on, Karen.
I disagree, Karen. I disagree, Mayor Bass, and you know what? Let's have an off-the-record conversation so that we can figure out a way to support them, because I don't think you really understand what they're going through right now. So social media allows me for a platform to talk about the things that I'm not allowed to on Eater LA. And I'm very, very specific to not let my voice go to waste, because, I know what the restaurants are going through no matter who they are. And this is a very difficult state to operate in, let alone open in, because of the regulations, the permitting process, the delays, the inspections. Like, it's, I'm sorry, it's unnecessary, and it really isn't in the name of public health.
Yeah. That sounds to me very familiar to what I have heard from restaurant owners in the Bay Area. Just the amount of bureaucracy and red tape and hurry up and wait and get this and spend this money. Oh, I actually didn't need that. And all these things that become, an impediment to not only just restaurants opening from the perspective of people want to eat, but restaurants employ people, right? And they are, monetary drivers to counties and to neighborhoods. So all of these things start to, really slow down a process that can help define the fabric of an area.
Oh, 1,000%. And if my dream is to have Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom in one room where I can say, like, look, just declare an emergency, because we are at that state. After COVID, restaurants have started to recover, but in LA we had the wildfires in January.
Yes.
And that absolutely devastated restaurants that were already on the edge. And if they don't start doing something, we're going to see a massive closures. And to me, that constitutes an emergency. And so I'm doing whatever I can to get, to sit down in those rooms.
Blow that whistle.
To be like, look, like, you really want to help? Like, just do this.
Let people do what they do.
Let them do what they do. And also, like, keep them employed, keep the money coming in for the state and the county and the cities. Like, that really is kind of what they want.
The point.
Yeah.
Yeah. You bring up the fires, and, as we sit here today, as we record, I think we are exactly 4 months out from January 7th, which I guess it's the day it kind of hit the press radar on, a main scale. Where were you that day?
I was at my home when it happened. And I grew up in Altadena, and I live 15 minutes away from the house I grew up in.
Okay.
And which was completely destroyed. And my father sold it a long time ago.
Okay.
But I was, we realized what was happening and that we had a job to do until my power went out. And because of what happened in Altadena, they didn't want to take any risks, and so they wound up shutting down the power in certain areas that were adjacent to it. I was not remotely close to the fires. Okay. And my aunt and uncle, who did live in Altadena, were forced to evacuate, and they came and stayed with me. And they realized that they needed more long-term plans, instead of living with their niece who had no power. And the day that they decided to move in with friends in South LA was the day that my boss said, is there any way that, I said, I'm willing to drive into Altadena and take a picture of the restaurants that we knew were lost. And I said, absolutely, because I needed to see it. I had a job to do, but I also needed to see it. And I know that neighborhood extremely well. Certain streets were blocked off. I meandered my way up to see it. And it was probably some of the hardest coverage I've ever done, because these are streets that I know like the back of my hand. Yeah. And to see them, and institutions like churches and restaurants and banks and houses and the last place that my father lived before he died was completely burned down too. Like, to see all of that was heartbreaking, but there was something that I needed to do to drive, like, I had a drive in me to just keep going to where I grew up. And there were still down power lines and burning houses and trees. It wasn't safe for me to go there. In hindsight, it was really stupid. But I needed to see it. And so the entire 2-block radius where I grew up is gone. There's a huge area that, is central Altadena, and it's above, Altadena Drive, and it's just one of these really beautiful communities. I feel really proud to have grown up there. That's now completely destroyed. Wow. And but there's things that you can do to help with the recovery process. I've started volunteering with a recovery organization. Get the word out, especially for restaurants, as much as I can. I think that's the only thing you can do in situations like this. Yeah, because I remember watching everything that was happening, especially in those first weeks, and just that feeling of, especially because we're not co-located here, that feeling of helplessness. You can only give to so many GoFundMes, and you give 20, 20, 20, and 20. You wonder, like, how is this really helping? How is this really impacting? And one of the things I thought about, of course, restaurants closing, but also, there's that trickle down effect of that, because a restaurant closes, and yes, that neighborhood no longer has that place to go to. But the supplier who might have been supplying the napkins and the tablecloths, who's all around the other side of town running a business, maybe as an entrepreneur, well, now they're impacted because those restaurants don't need that service anymore. Yeah. Or, for example, food suppliers, right, who maybe are in other areas of the state. So much produce and food production comes to California, so now you have people in complete other regions of the state that are impacted as a result of what's happening in LA. So there just was so much, this affects that, affects that, affects that. It's a trickle down effect.
So it's a trickle down, and it was like, what is, for a person not being in LA, what would be helpful? And as we now sit 4 months out, I kind of have the same question. What would be helpful?
For people to understand how on edge restaurants are right now. When they're going out, because like I'm when I'm not writing, I am scrolling through social media to see what people are talking about with LA restaurants and beyond. And I can't believe that people are still doing negative restaurant reviews right now. Like it's like now is not the time for you to say this was a 10 out of 10 or a 5 out of 5. First off, I don't know what your 10 means or your 5.
It's so subjective.
Like I don't get that whole thing. That's a whole other subject. We could do a whole episode on that, but we're not today. But for people to be saying, I don't understand why it's so expensive, and I'm like, yes, you do. Your grocery bill has gone up. Your cost of everything has gone up. Do you think it's not happening with restaurants?
Yes.
And how they don't want to be known as the place that raised their prices for the 4th time, like in less than a year. They don't want to do that, but they're forced to so that they can pay their employees, pay rent, and keep their place open. And for people to be really understanding of that, and that if you think that a place is gouging you, go and talk to them and ask them questions, but like in a really polite manner, because I guarantee you that manager is wondering if they're going to have a job in a week, because they can really go under that quickly.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the most important thing people can do is just be understanding and patient with places. And that if you can't afford to go out right now, like don't go out.
Don't. But just yes to everything you said. Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
And you can, those things, I love that those are tactical things that you can do regardless of where you are physically. Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
I'm so unfamiliar. I was telling you before we got started, I'm so unfamiliar with the topography and the landscape of neighborhoods in LA. And, I had been following you on social media. But I had not, prior to the fires, I had not heard of Altadena before this all happened. And, this is when I started to really pay attention to the things specifically that you were sharing, because I could tell your perspective was coming from something beyond just reporting, before I realized that is where you had spent time in your life. What was the food culture of Altadena like before the fires?
It's interesting to hear you say that. The Altadena I grew up in didn't want to be found, if that makes sense. Like we were perfectly healthy with like not bragging about how our place is the best. We already knew that. Like we were super proud of where we came from. There are hills and mountains that I used to I know intimately because I was a big hiker. I wanted to know every inch of Altadena, and I did, because back then, my parents weren't picking me up because we had no cell phones. Like I had to. I had no choice. But I know every inch of it. And the food culture there was or even the culture was very small town. There weren't that many. But what a lot of people didn't know was how big the Black community was in Altadena. Up until I'd say like the late 80s, early 90s, it was 40% Black. And homeowners of Blacks who came there who either worked at JPL in technology or at IBM in Glendale, like my father did, who were looking for home ownership where the restrictive covenants just weren't as in place as they were in other parts of Los Angeles or the country. And so we were like, okay, so we're just going to gatekeep on this, but not hardcore gatekeep on it. We just didn't talk about it.
Right. If you find it, you find it. If you don't, you don't.
It's all cool, and so we had our spots, like one of my favorites, when my dad came home with a bag of fried chicken from Bill's Chicken, like it was on that night. And it was one of those old school spots where all he did was one thing, and sometimes a secret barbecue menu in the back, but you had to know about that.
Okay.
But it was he came home, it was in a brown paper bag, it was greasy, and we just poured it across the table and just gobbled it up. It was just one of those spots, Black owned. There weren't nearly as many Latinos in Altadena at that time, but there was still a presence, and so of course we had tacos. There was another barbecue spot that was super close to my high school, and and it was amazing. There was a long-time soul food joint that was mostly like daytime, kind of stuff where you could get sausage and eggs and and all the good
foods,
stuff, breakfast foods that was there, and unfortunately it was gone in the fire. And, and so there were all these cute little secret spots, including my favorite place, which was another place that was lost in the fire called Fox's. And, and it was the first place that I went when I had saved up enough of my, money, where I sat down, I ordered my pancakes and my tea and, and some eggs and whatnot. And I was all proud of myself and whatnot. The waitress taught me how to tip because I didn't tip her. It was just one of those very special, intimate places. Not a ton, but like I knew all of those restaurants.
Okay. I mean, I don't know if this is the right term, but I was going to say, how do they bounce back? But there may not be a bounce back. It just might be that it comes back as something new and different. Do you think there is bouncing back to happen?
It depends on the community that comes back. Because they're who supports a restaurant. This is the case anywhere. There's another restaurant that shall remain nameless that they keep changing their menu. They keep changing like key elements. They change like the structure of it. Like they can't make up their mind about who they want to be. And even though a lot of the food that I've had there is outstanding and really great, I don't know who that chef is cooking for. I don't think the chef is cooking for the surrounding community or even greater Los Angeles, even though he has excellent technique. But you have to cook for the people in that community. So, back to like, talking about Issa Rae, like she is in partnership with the owners of Somerville, a really great spot that absolutely you should figure out.
I've heard really good things.
You need to figure out how to get there, okay? Yes. It's like, I don't know how you're going to do it, but I will help you in any way that I can. But, one of the things that the woman sitting next to me while I was waiting for my friend told me, she said, it's so nice. She's like, my family's owned a house here for 50 years. It is so nice to be able to walk here. She said, it's so nice to be able to walk in my Black neighborhood instead of having to drive to Marina Del Rey or West Hollywood or Beverly Hills or the South Bay. And she's like, I feel like that's what this restaurant is for. And that's what the owners told me.
Okay.
And, so Somerville means something to the surrounding community. And so these restaurants, they could bounce back, but it depends on who's rebuilding, who's moving back in.
Got it.
And, and the type of tastes that they have. And, that time will have to tell.
Remains to be seen.
Yeah.
Okay. I recently went to the Black Women in Food Summit for the third consecutive year, and I couldn't help but notice how much my business has grown. Instead of relying on sharing my Instagram page to give folks insight into what I do, I was able to direct them to my website. DiffWorks collaborated with me on designing a site that highlights all the services I offer in one place. I can send invoices, receive payments, create newsletters, and I have a professional, functional website for people and businesses to connect with the K in the Bay brand. So if you want to walk into your next networking event with the right tools to make marketing your business a little bit easier, schedule a consultation with DiffWorks today at staydiff.com. Right behind the fires, we then had the incoming, socio-political environment, right, which has brought with it its own things. And with LA being one of the places with a higher, if not the highest, population of undocumented residents, many of whom work in the restaurant industry, have you found restaurants kind of shying away from press as a way to just stay off the radar?
No, they want press. They want attention. They know that means humans in the seats. And that is what's most important to them. I do know that because I know some undocumented people that I've known for a very long time who are terrified and still working most of them work in restaurants and construction. The majority of the ones that I know are either Canadian or Mexican. No one ever talks about the Canadian undocumented.
No, they don't.
They can fly under the radar, but there are a lot of them here. And, and it's very tricky for them because a lot of them came for film and TV, which is in its own problems right now.
Yeah.
With productions moving elsewhere where they don't have to worry about healthcare and, pay raises and all that stuff.
Yes.
Another subject. But my friends who are Mexican undocumented, they're the ones who are the most terrified, who, when they pull up to a stop sign, it's a full stop. They have their signal, they signal for everything. They don't go out and drink anymore. Like it's a whole life change in hopes that, it can calm down just for a second.
Yeah.
Because they've built lives here. And most of them have 2 jobs. And, while very much contributing to, the community here and the ecosystem, but also in back where their families are. Yeah. But restaurants, they still want the promotion. They still want the eyeballs. They still want, people in their seats. But I'm finding them to be very protective of their undocumented workers.
As they should be.
As they should be.
As they should be. As a food writer, in your experience as a diner and a lifelong lover of food and the subject matter, myself included, I count myself in that, right? I've been going to restaurants for many years. I've always loved the industry and just the subject matter of food. And I'm always looking for ways to increase my learnedness around the topic from different angles. Do you think that food writing is something you can work your way into from just an experiential point of view? Or do you think you have to there are some fundamental things you need to have learned coming into food writing?
Yeah. You have to know the 101 basics of journalism, number one. If I can even draw from an example, we get a lot of pitches from freelancers. And the number one thing is that I always tell folks to read the publication that you're pitching to before you pitch to them. Because we're like, okay, yeah, we wrote about that back in 2018. Oh, you did? I'm like, yeah, you should do your homework before you pitch. But those fundamentals, I do believe that people need to work on.
Got it.
The other fundamentals of expanding your own experience is to utilize the people who are working at the restaurant as your educators in specific cuisine. And of course, you're not always going to get that. But you might come across someone who is very well versed in a specific cuisine just because of some of these people have been working in the restaurant industry for decades. Yes. And they know so much. They know so much about wines. They know so much about beers. They know so much about how this dish came to be, how this dish came to be in Los Angeles specifically. Like they know things and they've seen everything. They've seen it all. So I tap into them. Like when I get a really communicative waiter or a sommelier or a general manager that wants to chat, because they never know I'm coming. Like I don't announce myself unless it's like prearranged, but I'll just ask and ask and ask, and I'm like, okay, great, thank you. And I find that the majority of people are happy to share. But I'm also a big nerd, so like later on tonight when I'm like falling asleep, like I'll probably be reading about mezcal because I just got back from 12 days in Mexico.
Yes, I saw.
I thought I knew a lot about tequila and mezcal, but I don't.
Okay.
And now I'm obsessed. And
just going down the rabbit hole.
It's so fascinating. And I got to see a big industrial size mezcal distillery, and then a family operated one that's operated by 4 brothers.
Oh, wow.
And and the differences, and like, first off, there was this industrial sized, like tank where they're like, fermenting and whatnot. And then I saw the one that they've had in their family for like 4 generations.
Wow.
And, and I'm like, okay, so what tequila and mezcal should I be drinking? And they were like, don't drink this. And here's what you should look for. And how you have to ask, the bartender or whoever, like, was this agave aged actually 7 years? Because that's the minimum that it needs to produce a really good flavor. And, I just learned a lot. And I, as a food writer in LA, you kind of have to know a little bit about alcohol, but yeah. I know very little about it. And so now I'm obsessed. Okay. So just become obsessed and keep asking questions. And there's a podcast episode for everything.
For everything. So, my goodness. Look, for everything. I'm such a podcast junkie, and spend lots of time listening. I'm still on my freelance journey. This is a new endeavor for me. It's been 3 years now that I've been kind of moving in this space of the podcast. So I still am very much a newbie doing my homework. Yes.
I feel like I am too, though.
Really?
I do. I feel like that's kind of how the job stays interesting. Like that everything, I can't be an expert at everything. And I don't claim to be. I think I'm a good writer. But there's still so much to learn. And I'll never get to the end of it. And also too, we got almost 25,000 restaurants in LA. Yes. Like there's always something new to find.
Yes.
And, and also too, like, anytime someone comes here who's an outsider, they're like, I didn't really like LA. I'm like, okay, which LA?
Right.
Like we've got, I think it's like 88 cities within LA County, and they're all distinct from the next. And I am only recently getting to know like the South Bay, like Torrance. Like I didn't know how many really great restaurants were there and cafes. And in how Gardena, everyone thinks that Little Tokyo is where all the Japanese people are. No, they're all in Gardena. And the food there is completely different. And it's not close to my house. And so like you got to plan these trips. Long Beach is one of the best places to eat in California, period. And also like really beautiful and often like the unoverlooked, younger brother of LA.
Okay.
And
a good airport to fly in and out of. You can get in and out quickly.
Girl, it's ideal. There in Burbank are for sure. But you have to know all the secrets.
You have to know the secrets.
And so there's always a conversation to be had with someone, about what those secrets are, about what they know, what they've observed growing up.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the maker of anyone in media.
Okay.
To just keep being curious and ask a bajillion questions.
Always be a student.
Correct.
Okay, cool. The nominees just came out today for James Beard Awards, the Media Awards. They were announced this morning. I'm curious what you think the state of Black food writers is today, and if the numbers are increasing, or if you're seeing like, the field is gaining ground with Black folks. I think, like I could call off a handful of names: you, Osai Enderlin, Corsha Wilson, Nikki Miller-Cobb, Vishari Williams. Like there's a few that I can call off. But is this a space where there is true representation? I don't think it's ever going to really be parity, but is there at least growth? Oh,
there is. And all of the folks that you just mentioned are people who I have a lot of respect for or are friends with. Especially Osai. I think she does spectacular work, and she inspires me in ways that she's just amazing. However, probably the hardest part about us being represented is the pay. It's a huge factor. I am very lucky to have a husband who makes a lot more money than I do. I'm not saying my salary is terrible, but it's not what a lot of Black parents expect for us. Okay. If that makes sense.
I get what you mean.
Of course I'd like to make more money, but the industry that we're in doesn't necessarily pay that. And so you find a lot of folks, I wouldn't say that they're all, trust fund babies, but I don't think they worry about money. And that is a huge factor. I think that's definitely an inhibitor of people wanting to jump in and do this full time. And also too, just the lack of visibility. Like I worked on a story earlier this year about a lesbian bar that opened and closed and then reopened. And I was working on it with one of my other colleagues, but I felt like, and because there were women of color, lesbians of color that were directly impacted by this, I felt like they were not represented in this story. And so I reached out on Threads to ask like, hey, are there any queer Black and brown writers that I could talk to? And people did show up, but like I had no idea that they existed, how accomplished they were. And, I don't think that other editors are doing that right now. And, so, it took something within me, someone who I think that I'm very emotionally aware and socially aware, but, I never thought to put out a call like that. So I know that other people aren't even considering that. So there's a lot of inhibitors, pay being one, and, and just, figuring out how to make your network expand is another one, and which, if we're being real, a lot of management does not do.
It's kind of left to you to go find it if you want it.
Yeah. Anytime someone says, I wasn't able to find a insert, underserved person here. And I'm like, your network sucks. You need to do something about it. That's not a reflection of them. That's a reflection of you. Yeah. That tells me about your network. It sucks because there's a lot of everything right now.
Yes. There are people to be found. Yes. You know, more and more, I'm finding myself attached. Is that the right word? Attached to. Yes. Attached to and enjoying the experience of dining alone. Especially if it's a restaurant that I feel like I'm going to write about. And, the funny thing about that is, the tagline of my platform is creating community through food. So it feels like an oxymoron that you want to eat alone. But I feel like it really allows me to understand the personality of a restaurant and of food. I want to say I saw this somewhere on your social media, a reference about dining alone. I was like, oh, we have that in common. So I'm just curious what you feel like you get from dining alone that's different from dining with people.
Okay. So let me sit back in my seat.
And let me just say before you answer, for people, my mother is one of these people who dining alone is like a foreign concept that they would never do. Like, my heart breaks for you. I hate that you are missing the joy.
My mother too.
Okay.
Like it's like, oh my God, aren't you afraid people are looking at you? No, I do not care. Dining alone appeals to every part of my introvert possible. Okay. I know that I have this voice and it sounds like I'm doing all these things and whatnot, but I straddle in between being an introvert and extrovert. Most of the time on an introvert, because, for someone who's on the phone and writing all day and talking with my team, I don't feel like talking after a certain point. And so to sit down, especially at a bar, I love sitting at the bar to eat, is one of life's joys for me, because I get to just first off, just turn off all of the stuff going on upstairs. Yeah. And also it allows me to participate in one of my most favorite activities, eavesdropping. I love listening to people's conversations. It is the best pastime ever. And, like the last time I ate alone, I was sitting at this very hot bar, because this place allegedly had the best burger. It was an excellent burger. I had a burger and a martini. It was delicious. And so I'm just sitting there and I positioned myself so that I could see everyone coming in. And then a table, this very attractive couple comes in, expensive watches, shoes, like I'm just watching, right? And the next thing you know, I hear them talking and I just lean over a little bit more so that I can hear them pretending like I'm eating my burger, take a sip of water, take a sip of the martini. And they are having an argument about like, you didn't stand up for me. What's wrong with you? And he was just like, you hate your mother. Why do you need me to stand up for you in front of her? Like what? And it turned into this whole thing. And then the owner comes over and he's like, hey, what's up? I'm like, shh.
Trying to hit a story.
I gotta hear the rest of this. And I tell him what's up and he just starts laughing. But it just, I like observing people. I like seeing what they're eating. I like seeing what they're drinking, how long it takes them to get through a table. I love watching the bartenders, put their drinks together, watching the kitchen, expedite the food to the table.
I love the kitchen operation.
Yeah. Yes. I love watching like how everything goes. I don't think that people know how much of a miracle it is to get 4 plates on a table at the same time in a timely manner. And so I want to see how Spot restaurant runs, and but also too, the other side of that is that like after I'm done with work, if I have to interview a chef or something or be somewhere and I'm out and I don't feel like driving back in traffic, I'll just plop myself at a restaurant and eat. And so that winds up having me eating solo most of the time, something that I'm more than happy to do. But it's also a way to wait out traffic. It's a way for me to be like, okay, yeah, I am hungry. Let me go and check out this neighborhood. And so it has different purposes. But the number one enjoying purpose is to sit down, turn off the brain, and eavesdrop on other people.
Yeah, I love it. I almost prefer it. I don't want to say that because I don't want to sound like a recluse. I do. But I prefer it sometimes to dining with people because like you love a bar, I love a chef's counter. And, all restaurants don't have them. But if I can get a seat at a chef's counter where I feel like I'm getting the behind the scenes show, right, of how this restaurant moves and operates, the function of it. Restaurants have always been, and I don't think I realized this till recently, like magical places to me, so Sometimes I go and I don't even have a full meal. I just might get an appetizer, but it's just wanting to kind of sit in that space where those things are happening. And I can just sometimes feel like I pay attention to the flavors a little bit differently. Like I might take a bite of something and then write something on my notes app in the phone about what I thought about it, so that later if I want to go back and write about it, I can. But that's not the function when I'm sitting with a person, because I'm engaged with them and I'm talking with them. So I think they all serve their purpose. And also, I'll tell you what just burns my ass. It's like going to a restaurant with people who complain. Like you'll never go with me again if you show up complaining and, asking 50,000 questions.
Or treating the staff badly.
That too.
We can't be friends after that.
No, I haven't had that experience with a person treating the staff badly, but that would turn me off for sure.
It's happened to me.
Okay.
And it's like, and it was truly
that?
people who don't feel good about themselves. Like to pick on service staff, like what's wrong? You're going to pick a fight with someone who's bringing you your food and drink,
right?
Like what are you thinking of?
That's not
like,
smart.
No, we can't hang out.
No. Yeah. Treat the service people bad or be complaining. I just can't do it. You shared on your social media. Well, let me take a step back before I get to that, because you did bring up your trip to Mexico, which I saw. And I travel. I have not done nearly as much international travel as I would like to, but I do travel quite a bit. And I'm curious what your approach to food is when you travel. Are you viewing it from a writer's perspective, or are you viewing it from a traveler experiencing a new place?
Interesting that you say that, because my trip to Mexico was by myself this time around, and something that I haven't done in a while. And I think that everyone, well, at least the right personality, the person who values that, or even says, maybe I'll go by myself, like to do it. And especially as a woman, and truthfully, I feel safer in Mexico than I do in the United States. But it's hard for me to turn off that restaurant editor brain. It's very difficult. And so I wind up taking an approach that's very methodical. Like, this meal is just for me. This meal is for work. This meal is for me. This meal is for work. And, where I'm not taking any pictures. I'm just having a moment with the food, just so that I can have those kind of moments, because I was experiencing that back here. And so once a week I have that kind of meal. I just go and enjoy it. No pictures, no talking to anybody, just enjoy it. And so in Mexico, it was a very unique trip. I in Oaxaca, because I went to Guadalajara, Oaxaca, and Mexico City. And in the last two cities, I have friends. And in Guadalajara, I knew no one. And so, there, you have to take certain precautions, as a woman anyway.
Yes.
But, I just knew that, like, let me just take it easy. I'll eat when I'm hungry. I will hang out in the Airbnb for as long as I want to if I'm tired.
Yeah.
When I was in Mexico City and I was getting ready for my flight, I didn't have enough time for breakfast. My friends ordered me Uber Eats.
Okay.
When I was coming back to LA, like, to just be flexible about it and to not pay attention to social media and video reviews or third-party reviews like Yelp, because a lot of the time I don't agree with most people's taste buds. And so, there were 2 days where I just didn't feel like going to any restaurants. And so I just felt like cooking myself. And so I cooked with one person that I met while in Oaxaca, and it was awesome.
Okay.
And, and we just kind of figured some stuff out. And, but it does beg for, requires some flexibility, from day to day, because it's still vacation. And so I want to come back rested and not feeling like, I was working all the time.
Going through the mill. I'm working on that now. I refer to them in a previous episode as Action Jackson trips, where you and I keep finding myself on Action Jackson trips, and it's my own doing, because I schedule an itinerary before I get there. So then you get there, and it's a series of collecting experiences for the purposes, for me, of coming back and either, writing on my Substack about them or creating content, which I've really started to move away from writing in depth about restaurants from a content perspective. One, because I don't, and we alluded to this a little bit earlier. I feel like I don't really like the environment that sits within so much. But also, people don't want to read it. I would write lovely, paragraphs about my experience at restaurants and be talking really in depth about the food and the chef's background and did you know this? And, people are not reading that. That's why I just moved it to Substack. If you're a person who's kind of wants to get in the weeds of that, go on over to Substack. But, I'll give you these 5 pictures on a carousel and say, it was nice. And that's what you could get on Instagram. I'm just,
That was a heavy sigh because we can tell how low people are scrolling through our site, and the majority don't make it past half. And and it's just something that I've come to kind of accept. That less people are reading, and also too like understanding that like a lot of people. I sat next to a woman at a dinner party a couple of months ago who said, "I know who you are. I know who you write for. I just don't have the time to read your stories." And I said, you know what, that's fair. And she's like, I'm really sorry. She's like, I just look for what you're talking about and I scan it and that's that. But I think I'm not really saying that people are like, I'm not willing to denigrate them or, talk badly about them. I just think that people's tastes are changing.
Yes.
And, and I need to figure out a way to reach them through however way that they want to ingest media because they are curious about restaurants, but they don't have time to scan through all of my carefully worded, 600 word story.
I love it. I'd be living for a 600 word rundown on a restaurant. I'm here for it. You talked about on your social media that people think, they think of this job in terms of the obvious perks that come with it. I'm sure, you eat at all the best places. I don't know if you not announce yourself like I am here, but people know you're coming, or do you let them know who you are? But even outside of that, there's a real depth to this kind of work that oftentimes means you're writing things that create accountability for people, or you're writing things that just holding people's feet to the fire, which isn't always received well. How do you balance kind of the things about this that aren't so fun with the obvious fun of doing this kind of work?
It's a good question. Of course, yes, there are the perks. Like we're about to go out to a place where the chef does know that I'm coming, but only because we've never met. And he said, please let me know that you're coming whenever you're in this part of town. Because it's rare that I can make it down here for dinner in a time that can have me back in bed before 9:30. Okay. Because like I wake up early, I go to bed early. That's just my thing.
Yes.
But most of the time, no one even knows that I'm there. And I like it that way. I'd like to be able to better represent what the restaurant can provide customers without knowing that, like they pulled out all the red carpet and all the stops for me. I think it's better for me in reporting. But as far as holding people to the fire, there's one restaurant in Northeast LA that we knew that activists were targeting because it felt very much like a gentrifying force of a restaurant. And I still believe that it is that type of restaurant. And primarily because I was hearing from the people who lived in the surrounding areas, a very blue collar neighborhood for a generation, mostly Latino, and how they would start construction at 6 a.m. and they wouldn't end until midnight, which is against, county laws, and that they didn't care. And so that told me everything that I needed to know about that restaurant. And so me and one of my colleagues at the time wrote a story about it. And, and I know that I will probably never go into that restaurant. Like I've just seen their lack of accountability with connecting with the surrounding community that they're in. The parking situation around that neighborhood have changed dramatically since they opened. Like if you're going to go into a neighborhood, I feel like you need to really connect with the community so that you can not be a burden to the people who live there.
Yes.
And, and and for the record, I love that kind of story because it, speaks to every bone in me as a Black woman, of making sure that the people who have lived there forever because they couldn't live everywhere else, are looked after instead of just people who will eventually, unfortunately, very likely have to move out because they can't afford it anymore. And if there's an opportunity for me to do that, I will dive into it because it is my obligation as a restaurant editor, and and as a Black woman, and as someone who's from here, because I am one of those folks who, even if I wanted to move back into my hometown, I couldn't afford it, because of what it's become in recent years. So yeah, it's a big part of my reporting. I think every good reporter wants to do that. Yeah. But it can be very tricky.
Yeah, keep the native people
Absolutely.
Who are native to the areas,
who make the community what it is.
Exactly. It's why you came there, right? We hope if you came with pure intentions, it's why you came there, right? Not to just, displace and replace.
Exactly.
What are 2 or 3 exciting things happening in the food scene in LA right now?
Actually, one of the stories that I'm working on is how, even though restaurants are having an extremely hard time right now, there's a lot of Black restaurants opening, like a lot, in the last year. And I quite literally pressed publish on a TikTok and Instagram video, I think it was on January 5th, days before the fires happened, where I said, hey, everybody, this looks amazing for LA. And I listed off a whole slew of restaurants.
I saw that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm glad you did. Because I was really proud, because I'm like, I was just taking inventory and I'm like, yeah, LA restaurants are feeling very Black. And how awesome, because as someone who grew up here, watching our population continue to dip as people move back to where their ancestors came from in Texas and Tennessee and Louisiana and the like. There's still folks that are here, or even new ones that are coming, because there's a bunch of New Yorkers that decided to come this way.
Because we cold.
I get it.
We were cold.
And they're doing amazing things, like opening up a New York chopped cheese and one of the hottest restaurants in Hollywood called Linden, that is, every time you walk in there, it's beyond Black. Okay. And, where I'm like, I don't see this very often. Like, when I walked in, the owner was like, yeah, it's kind of great, isn't it? I'm like, yes, it is. So that's a number one trend that I see. And the other one that I see coming that hasn't happened yet is, thanks to the new tariff situation and how, a lot of produce is going to be very, very expensive unless it's seasonal. And so I do see in the future, unless things shift, and who knows with the person who's in charge right now, but we're going to have to shift back to seasonal, unless people want to pay $20 for a strawberry, unless people want to all that stuff that we're getting, in certain times a year,
it's not coming from here.
Not coming from here.
Right.
I mean, California will be okay because we have an abundance of a lot of things, but I think that is a good thing. I would love to see people start to get used to not having everything be so convenient all the time, and have people think about things instead of having the expectation. And if that actually comes to pass, provided things don't shift in the current trajectory, that could be a new thing. And I welcome what chefs and restaurant owners are going to do in the wake of that, because they have to reinvent themselves and figure it out. So I don't know. We'll have to see.
We'll wait and see. We'll wait and see. Well, this has been great. I feel like I've learned so much talking to you. So thank you again for coming. I'm going to close us out with a few fun questions.
Shoot.
Okay. What's your favorite food TV show?
TV show? The Bear.
Okay. I could not get through episode 1. I have to try again.
You get through episode 3 and you're in.
Okay.
You're going to love the characters. But the first episode is a little hard because they're not particularly likable in episode 1. Okay. Go back and give it a retry.
I'm going to give it a retry. Okay. What's a restaurant that isn't on people's radar but should be?
Ooh, good question. I'll tell you one that I tried this week.
Okay.
It is a kebab stand underneath the freeway near Chinatown, Echo Park, and downtown, like right where they all converge. And these Turkish Kurds are like LA has a ton of Middle Eastern food. Like you pick a region, we've got it, but we don't have a lot of Turkish people. We have Lebanese, Armenian, Israeli, Armenian. We've got it, but we don't have a lot of Turks. And these guys, like, they've got these long swords where they got food on there, and it's called baba kebab.
Okay.
And I just went down there and sat underneath this bridge that's got like dripping water from it, from the rain. And I'm sitting there and I'm just like, this is so delicious. And they're all guys that are just, they have extensive restaurant experience back home, but they are only recently in the last 5 years here. Yeah. And they are preparing some of the most delicious stuff underneath a bridge near downtown.
Okay. Good food under bridges. We have some food underneath freeways in Oakland that is pretty good. Yes. Late reservations or early reservations?
Early.
I know that's right. Give me a 5:30 reservation. By the time it's going up in here, I'm out. You ain't lying.
I will fake a phone call to leave if I have to. Like, because I'm like, it's like 8:45. Like, I'm supposed to be in bed by like in 45 minutes. Oh, really? Hey, you guys, I have to go. I've done it. I have faked a phone call.
I got to go. I love an early reservation. Like, let's make a reservation at 8. Get somebody else to do it.
Yes. No, we can't do that. No. But also you get to see the restaurant come to life.
Yes. You get to see the restaurant come to life. And then you get to leave it in life. Yes. It's like, y'all have a good one. Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. We're aligned there. What is your favorite summer cocktail?
Paloma.
Okay.
Yeah. Very simple. Grapefruit, a little bit of fizz, mezcal or tequila.
Okay.
It's just perfect.
Nice. All right. And last one, most underrated regional cuisine.
Underrated. That's hard to call in Los Angeles. Nepalese.
Oh.
We don't have a lot of Nepal restaurants in LA, but when you find a good one, there's one in Pasadena and there's one in Big Bear, 2 hours away. And they are delicious. And you walk in and you're like, this feels very Indian, but it's not. It's slightly Indian just because of, it borders India and, South Asian. But it's when you get a good one, it's like, it's kind of religious just because it's just got its own little unique tweaks. And just big flavor. It's so wonderful when you get a good one.
Okay, I think I'm going to take that as my homework assignment back in the Bay is to find a Nepalese restaurant and go try it out. I have not had that cuisine before. All right.
Or any kind of African, truly. Like in Southern California, we don't have a lot of African restaurants, and that breaks my heart. And, I have one friend, Keanu Moju, she wrote Africali.
She's been on the podcast.
She's been on.
Yes,
my girl. Like she was just like, I wish there were more down here. And I'm like, I just hadn't thought about it, in the same way that we don't have a lot of Puerto Rican places because we don't have that huge of a population of either here. And I wish that there were because the ones that I've tried are wonderful.
Yeah, need more. I love it. Ethiopian food is one I've been wearing out. We have a good few in Oakland, Mela Bistro, and of course Cafe Colucci. And sometimes I just get on a run where how you eat something and then like you need to eat it for the next 5 days.
Pretty much.
Like I had to like stop going to Cafe Colucci for just a minute. There are other restaurants, but the food was so good, and I just love the culture of Ethiopian food.
You want what you want.
You want what you want, and we like to get what we want. And I'm so glad that again you were able to make time to talk with me today. Tell people where they can find out more about you and where they can take in some of your work.
You can go to la.eater.com or just go into Google and type in Eater LA, and it will pull up our entire website. And that will tell you, like, we write stories Monday through Friday at a minimum of 4 from my team of 3. And I don't know how we do it.
Y'all busy.
Constantly. This is why I go to bed at 9:30. And so you can go there. You can also go to Instagram. I'm at Mona Eats. But I post a lot on Threads just because it's far more comfortable for me to like just post a thought versus a photo. And those are the places where I'm most. And it is extremely common for me to just be wandering around Los Angeles and just poking my head into a space and just grabbing something to eat and then hopping back in my car and then just driving to another place. Like sometimes like 3 in a day.
Oh, 3 in a day. I like it. I call those a food jaunt. I'll get up early and just be moving around, trying food.
That's right.
Yes. So a woman after my own heart. I love it. If you want to keep up with me in between episodes, you can find me at kayinthebay.com, or you can find me on Instagram at heykayinthebay. If you've enjoyed this episode of the podcast, please like, share, and subscribe, and leave us a 5-star rating. That has been this week's episode of the As Told By podcast from LA, big city of dreams. I will see y'all soon with a new episode. Thank you. Peace.